And the first thing I want to do tonight is talk a little bit more about this prorating thing. Look at a couple different other scenarios, and this will be a good opportunity for us to review as well. So the scenarios we've run so far with prorating is when we are prorating or sharing the expense of this year's taxes. You can almost always bank to see that on your exam, and that how much does the buyer have to bring to closing problem. Another prorating scenario that you may run into is HOA dues. I think for test purposes, you're going to see HOA dues are either monthly or annually. So again, if they want you to use the days of the month or a 30-day month, they'll have to tell you. If they want you to use a 360-day year, 30-day month, whatever, the calendar year, they'll have to tell you. HOA dues work the same way as taxes. So either they have been paid or they have not been paid. So you can run that the same scenario that you would run this year's property taxes. A couple other scenarios I want to talk about and just make sure we're good on. You may have a test question. It will not be on the, well, I doubt it would be on the mini CD, but you may have a test question about prorating rent. So let's talk about prorating rent. When the buyer buys and there's an existing tenant in place, the buyer buys honoring the existing tenant and honoring the existing lease. So the month of closing, we're sharing a tenant. Thus, we're sharing this month's rent. Make sense so far? For our purposes, we want rent is due and payable on the first of each month. So let's say we go to closing this month, which is February. And rent was due and payable on February 1st. And that went to the seller. And then at some point in February, we'll say, what the heck, let's say today, on February 22nd, the deed changes hands. So the seller has the tenant on February 1st, which means the tenant pays the seller for the entire month's rent on February 1st. Deed changes hands on February 22nd. By the time March 1st rolls around, we have a new landlord in place. Today, they're the buyer. Tomorrow, they're the owner, right? So we have a new landlord in place that's going to take over the tenant starting the next day. The seller will be responsible for the day of settlement, which means they'll get to keep today's rent. So if we have a shared month of rent, the seller has collected rent for the entire month of February, and that property is going to change hands on February 22nd. If the seller's already collected rent for the month of February, let's stop and ask ourselves, who owes who?
Seller owes buyer.
The seller owes the buyer some money, doesn't they? Because tomorrow this tenant becomes the buyer's. So when we're prorating rent, we're going to be looking at a debit the seller, credit the buyer. And the period of time we're looking for is going to be the day after settlement to, using a 30-day month, the end of that month. So the seller owes the buyer some money. The seller owes the buyer rent for the remainder of the month. So it would shake out whatever the monthly rent is. Yes, the problem has to tell you. So it would shake out to debit the seller, credit the buyer for how many days? You got the 23rd, 24th, 25th, 26th, 27, 28, 29, and 30. There's 8 days that the seller owes the buyer. Take your monthly rent divided by 30 to get daily rent, and then times it by the number of days, in this case, 8. So rent.
Julie, I have a question.
Yes.
I know it's leap year.
Yeah,
so
I was about to say that too.
We're not
29
worrying about that in pre-licensing.
Okay.
I'm not rewriting all these problems for that. I'm not doing it for a year.
But even though it's February, you still count it to the 30th?
If they tell us it's a 30-day month.
Okay.
If they tell us, I'm sorry, 360-day year, every single month has 30 days. They have to tell you 360-day year or 365. Good news is by the time you guys get there, leap year will be past us. But seriously, you guys, when you're doing these practice questions and your exam and all this other stuff, just don't even think about the fact that it's a leap year unless the problem specifically says this is a leap year. Other questions on rent? So we said there's usually, typically three things that we're going to prorate, buyer and seller. Three most common things that'll be prorated. Three of those shared expenses between buyer and seller. So this year's taxes, HOA dues, if applicable, and rent, if applicable. What if 2023 taxes were never paid? What if that 2023 tax bill is outstanding? How's that going to be handled at settlement?
Debit the seller?
That's it. Because last year's tax bill is all on the seller. The buyer was nowhere around last year. So for some reason, the seller never paid last year's taxes. That's only going to be debit the seller. It's only shared expense when it's the year of closing, of settlement.
Would it be a debit the seller or would it come out as a lien?
A lien is a debit to the seller. It's money that they owe.
Okay.
Yep, it's money that they owe to pay off that lien, to clear that lien so they can pass that clear marketable title. Another scenario, rent or prorating scenario I want to run by you guys, and I don't know if you'll see or not, but I think it can't hurt. And I do think in the real world, we're going to start seeing this more and more. So let's run it real quick. And this last scenario with prorating is when the buyer assumes the seller's loan. So we've talked about when the buyer assumes the seller's loan, that means the seller makes the mortgage payment on February 1st. Property will change hands. We will go to closing. Let's go again today on February 22nd. And then on March 1st, the buyer will make the mortgage payment. The buyer's not originating a new loan. The buyer is assuming the seller's loan. They're taking over the seller's loan. Who can remind me how interest in that PITI payment is paid? What is that paying? The interest in your mortgage.
Is it till the end of the
Principal
month?
and interest.
Oh,
It's your principal and interest, and you pay it on the first. But when you pay it on the first, what are you paying? I guess I'm not asking it right. Let me try to rephrase that.
The
When you
month
make the
before.
You're paying in arrears, right? Thank you. You saw me. You saw me. You may not have said it, but you saw me. So what I was trying really hard to say right there, when you make your mortgage payment, the interest is paid in arrears, which means when you make that interest payment on the first of each month, you're paying last month's interest. So the seller makes the mortgage payment in February 1st. They paid January's interest. Property changes hands on February 22nd. The buyer is now going to make the payment on March 1st, which covers February's interest. Does the buyer need to get some money for February? Is it only fair to share that? Why would why would either party be responsible for that whole month? So if the buyer is going to make the payment on March 1st, that's going to cover February's interest, my question to you is, who owes whom?
Seller owes buyer.
Now the seller owes the buyer some money. So we're going to do how that shakes out on the settlement statement is going to be a debit the seller, credit the buyer. And what the seller owes the buyer for is the period of time that they own the property, including the day of settlement. So the seller owes the buyer for their portion of the interest, that shared expense for this month. Questions? Welcome. Okay. So again, you guys, anytime, let's back up. When it comes to prorating, when you see the word prorate or shared expense, anything like that, my suggestion is to draw it out so you can see who owns when, whose responsibility is when. You're dividing, whatever dividing you're dividing the month, the year, whatever, that dividing date is the day of closing. And then I think the most important question with prorating is who owes whom? Somebody owes somebody some money. And that's the whole idea of prorating, is taking that shared expense and making it fair. We're just making it fair between the two parties. Questions, prorating, comments? Okay, let's Kahoot. Y'all grab your phones. We're going to do a Kahoot on units 14, 15, and 21. A couple questions from each. I'll grab you a QR code. So here's your QR code for this Kahoot. Go ahead and scan it and get in. If you're on the app or the website, you need a game pin. The game pin is 789643. You're ready. If you're just joining us, you can still get in real quick. And again, if you don't want to play, I'm not going to make you play. But if you don't want to play on your phone, that's fine. Please at least just play in your mind, play along in your mind, see how you're doing. Everybody in that wants to Kahoot? We ready? One more? Couple more? Sunshine. All right. Let's Kahoot. 14, 15, and 21. Couple questions from both. Or each. Question number 1. A mortgage loan can have its lien priority lowered through the use of a ten seconds. A mortgage loan can have its lien priority lowered through the use of a subordination agreement. Remember, if you subordinate, you place yourself in a lower ranking. And where we're going to see this is when you have a senior mortgage, which is your first mortgage, the mortgage you took to purchase the home. And then maybe somewhere down the road, you take out another mortgage, you take out a second mortgage. That second mortgage is referred to as your junior mortgage. Now we know lien priority says that the senior mortgage will get paid first because they recorded first. What if you want to refinance that senior mortgage? They're going to redo the whole thing, which means they have a new deed of trust to record, which would put them in a lower ranking than the junior mortgage. The senior mortgage isn't going to do that if the junior mortgage doesn't agree to subordinate. The senior mortgage isn't going to allow the junior mortgage to get paid first. If the junior mortgage says, I'm not going to do that, then you won't be able to refinance. Questions on this one? Let's see who got it right out the gate. Tink got it right the fastest, followed by overdraft fee. You'll have to tell me who you are. Nisi, Sleepy, you guys got to fess up in private chat. Tell me who you are. And then CC. Questions on that? All right. Question number 2, the right a borrower has to regain the property ownership by paying the debt after the foreclosure sale. After the foreclosure sale. Looks like we got through that one. So the right, a borrower has to regain the property ownership by paying their debt after the foreclosure sale. This is the redemption period. If you're redeeming yourself, you're saving yourself. So what we're trying to do is save ourselves, redeem ourselves from foreclosure. So the redemption period is the opportunity. Questions on this one? Tank and overdraft fee. I know who you are now. Nisi. I know who Cece is. What's up? The machine. Again, you'll have to tell me who you are in a private chat. Feel free to use your private chat. On the board. Question, let's see. Question number 3. The main purpose of a mortgage. The main purpose of a mortgage. It offers security for the loan. The mortgage is what gives the lender the collateral on the property. The mortgage is what the lender has in the event of the borrower's default. Questions on this one? It does create a lien. That's like a side effect, an after effect. But again, the whole purpose is to provide security, offer security to the lender. So we got Nisi's on the board. Rachel's up, ready to pass. Got to tell me who you are. Tink's still on. Jessica's up. Question number 4. Fannie Mae. Fannie Mae. Fannie Mae purchases loans. Fannie Mae is a player on the secondary mortgage market, and Fannie purchases loan from the primary. The primary is who originate the loan. Fannie is who purchases it. Player on the secondary mortgage. Who are the other players on the secondary mortgage? We talked about Ginnie Mac, Freddie Mae. Those are those secondary players that purchase from the primary. The primary is who originates. Questions on this one? So we got Nisi's on fire. Rachel's still on the board. Tink came up, ready to pass. And overdraft fee. Nisi, you should have a little fire symbol next to you're on fire this round. Question number 5. What is the primary benefit of an FHA insured loan? Primary benefit of an FHA insured loan. It offers, it insures, let's see, primary benefit, it insures the lender, it offers a safety net. But one of the big benefits, the biggest benefit is for the borrower, low down payment. I think we talked about the low down payment. The borrower in some cases could bring like 3.5%, kind of like the VA loan where they may have 0 down payment. So to the borrower, for the borrower, primary benefit is that low down payment. The loan to value ratio for the lender, then that's going to be high, because remember, the loan to value ratio is through the eyes of the lender. So if my down payment's only 3.5%, what's the lender's loan to value ratio? Like 96.5, right? So they're going to have a higher loan to value ratio. Questions on this one? So we got Rachel's on top. Nisi's still on. Overdraft fee came up. Tink and ready to pass. KK is our highest climber, up 10 places. At settlement, commission generally appears as a Seven seconds. Who pays commission? The seller. Since the seller's paying, that's going to show up as a debit to the seller. Questions on this one? Thank you. So Rochelle's still on top, on fire this round with Nisi. Tinks keeps creeping up. Overdraft fee ready to pass. Rochelle has 6 correct in a row. And last one, which of the following items is not usually prorated between buyer and seller at settlement? Seven seconds. What don't we prorate? Recording fees. That's not a shared expense. So the buyer will pay the recording fee for the deed and the deed of trust. Remember, the deed of trust is the lender, but they let the buyer pay for it. The seller may have recording fees to show that they paid off their liens. So there's going to be what's called a deed of release that they have to record to show that those balances are zero when that title, when that deed changes hands. Each party is going to pay their own recording fee. The things that we typically prorate are this year's taxes, HOA dues if applicable, and rent if applicable. Questions on this one? All right. So our podium winners, I got 3rd place winner of Tink. We got 2nd place winner of Nisi. And our 1st place winner is Rochelle. I got 4th and 5th runners up of CC and overdraft fee. Good job, good Kahoot. You know, guys know after you Kahoot, that means tomorrow you get to go get yourselves a candy bar, right? That's what that means. So there you go. You were ready to pass? Good. Good, thank you. Questions? Let's shut that up. I know, to me, it's more important that you guys don't start writing yet. To me, it's more important that you guys get the content of Kahoot than you do, place on the podium. I know those questions go fast as well, but it kind of gets you working with the clock, which you're going to have to do on your exams as well. So have you guys started when you're taking like a test in your or quiz in your book or a quiz in the online learning system that's a flat PDF? Are you guys starting to work with the clock or been working with the clock? If you haven't, I suggest doing so. The interactive ones that you answer the question and then it tells you right or wrong and then why, you can't do a clock with those. I don't want you to do a clock with those because I want you to take your time on those. But when you get to the online learning system and it's like, I call it a flat PDF, but it's like a PDF uploaded in, I would suggest starting to work with the clock now. Because if you're leaving a bunch of time on the table, that tells us you can slow down. If you're not getting done in time, that tells us you need to speed up a bit. I'd say on average, we can plan on 2 minutes per question. So when you get to those PDFs that are loaded or the quizzes in your book, just see how many questions there are, times it by 2 and set your timer. And then that way you can kind of gauge. So that way we won't run out of time on test day.
And you said to save the math for last usually?
Say it again, I'm sorry.
I said you said to save the math for last usually?
I do, because the math's going to take you longer. They're going to take you longer than most of them. So yeah, what I suggest, what works, I think, and what has worked, when you read a test question and you know the answer it, go to the next. If you read a test question and you don't know the answer, those are the ones you bookmark. So it seems like the first time you go through that test, you're going to be going through it pretty quickly. But once you answer it, then you know you don't need to go back and spend some time on it. I know you guys have seen in practice those problems that want to know when it goes from being an offer to a contract, for example, and those problems are like this long. So when you go to the next question and you see a problem this long, you may want to bookmark it because you know you might need a little bit more time than that. The other thing I have to say, how many of you are in a habit of changing the right answer to a wrong answer? This is confession time. Stop it. Stop it right now. When you answer it, why are you going back? If you're going back, you're second guessing yourself. And once you second guess yourself, that's when you change it from right to wrong. Break that habit right now. You read it, you know it's B, you put B and you move on. Don't go back. If you read it and you don't know it's B, those are the ones that you bookmark. But I don't want you guys changing answers unless you're like 5,000% sure. Because more often than not, your initial gut instinct is right. So break that habit, please. Y'all want to hear my horror stories? Pre-pandemic, when we were still in person, I actually had Lane and I had to grade these things by hand. You know how many times we saw that? Do you know how many times I had students that would have passed had they not changed those 3 or 4 answers? I saw it on the regular. Please don't do that. Thank you. Stop it. Don't second guess yourself. And the other thing about bookmarking, if you read it and you're not sure, it might be that a future question triggers something for you. So instead of spending all this time on it now, just kind of read it real quick. Okay, I need to spend time with this and go on. And it might be that 3 questions and go, oh yeah, that's right. Does that make sense? So you can kind of, that's one thing I like about ClassMarker. And it's the same program you guys did with your midterm. So it gave you experience, it gave you exposure, but you can bookmark, you can go back, you can go forward, you can kind of maneuver through the test. Questions? So we're in unit 17. So unit 17 is our appraisers unit. So let's put our appraiser's hat back on. When we started 17, we introduced you to value, what value means to the appraiser. Remember, only appraisers get to say that word, value. Real estate agents, we can't say value because we're not licensed appraiser. We also looked very briefly at a sample appraisal. We'll come back to that in just a bit once we've been through the appraiser's approaches to value. So that's where we're starting off. The page after the sample appraisal gives us the appraiser's approach to value. And actually, there are 3 approaches that the appraiser may take to arrive at value. Now, they're going to use as many of the 3 as they can, and each approach is for a different type of property. So really, it comes down to the type of property that the appraiser is trying to determine value for. So the first approach to value that the appraiser may take is called the sales comparison approach. And what the sales comparison approach does, the appraiser goes in and studies the subject property. The subject property is the one that we're trying to determine value on. So it studies the subject property. How many bedrooms is it? How many bathrooms? Square foot? What type is it? Is it a 2-story? Is it a condo? Does it have a garage? Does it have a basement? What are the features of the subject property? And then the appraiser goes out and looks at comps. C-O-M-P-S. Comps is short for comparables. We're looking for comps on recently sold nearby properties that are similar to the subject property. Let's understand this going into it. No 2 properties are exactly the same. Even in your cookiest, cutterest of neighborhoods, even in your condominium complexes, your townhome complexes that all look very similar from the outside, lots can change when you walk in the front door. So no two homes are the same. You're never going to find a perfect match. But what they are looking for are similar properties that recently sold nearby. The theory behind the sales comparison approach: by studying recently sold comps, that'll help us determine what a buyer would be willing to pay for the subject property. We know what a buyer was willing to pay for a comp across the street 3 months ago. We know what a buyer was willing to pay half a mile away, 4 months ago. So by studying those recently sold comps, the theory is once we make a few adjustments, that'll help the appraiser determine what a buyer should be willing to pay for the subject property. The sales comparison approach is the best approach for resale single-family homes and land. A few seconds ago, I said each approach has a different type of property. So the sales comparison approach is the best approach when the appraiser is trying to determine value on resale single-family homes and vacant land. When the appraiser is trying to determine, when they're making adjustments to the comps, the idea is to make the comps match the subject. Never, ever adjust the subject. That's the one that we're trying to find value in. Instead, the appraiser is going to adjust the comps to match the subject. So, for example, let's pretend this pink line is our subject property, and we're trying to find properties, comparable properties, to make it match the subject. So let's say we have a comp that has a superior feature. Maybe it has more square footage than the subject property. Maybe it has a garage and the subject property doesn't. Whenever we find a comp with superior features, we're going to adjust the comp down to match the subject. Similarly, if we find a comp that has inferior features, maybe it doesn't have as much square feet, maybe it has a fewer bathroom, I said two, maybe it doesn't have the features that our subject property does. It's inferior, meaning we need to adjust the comp up. Always adjust the comps to match the subject. I got another little, I got a little exercise I want us to do together. Remember all those tricks I got you doing on your exam? This is another dumb little trick to help you remember this. I already got you counting on your fingers and looking at your butt, so let's do one more. All right, give yourself some room, push back. I don't want you to punch your computer screen, but give yourself some room. I want you to take your left hand, make a fist, and hold it straight out in front of you. We're gonna, don't punch me. We're gonna call, we're gonna call your left hand your subject property. And we're gonna see that our left hand is never ever gonna move. Your left hand's gonna be going to sleep by the time I'm done with you, okay? Let's pretend our subject property has 3 bedrooms. And we go out and we find some comps. And one of the comps that we find has 4 bedrooms. Which one has more bedrooms, the subject or the comp? The comp. So the comp, right hand, take it above your head. If the comp has 4 bedrooms and the subject has 3, what are we going to do to make the comp match our subject? We're going to deduct. We're going to lower it until they are level. All right, shake it out. Give your left hand a break. Take that left hand, make a fist again, still your subject property, never, ever, ever changing. Subject property still has 3 bedrooms, but now you have found a comp with 2. Which one has more bedrooms now? The subject. What do you need to do if your right hand is by your side with 2 bedrooms? What do you need to do to make your right hand match your left? You add, you raise it up to add. Now I know on the exam, I don't want you guys at Person View Testing Center be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna, so you guys, you're so cute. You do like this little modified thing, which I think is great, But if you can get practicing on it, I think that'll help us see it, because honestly, that's the challenging thing with this. Superior comps are adjusted down, inferior comps are adjusted up. And the little hand trick will help us remember. The subject has 1,200 square feet, the comp has 11. What do I have to do to make the comp match? I got to add the value of 100 square feet. What term will be defined as the house for sale? That's our subject property. The subject property is the one that we're trying, or the appraiser is trying to determine value on. So we'll look at an example in just a second. But what are some adjustments? What are some things that the appraiser may consider? Well, date of sale. I want things that are recently sold. Ideally, the appraiser is not going back further than 6 months. 6 months is a really good indication. Now, if it's been a low market where we don't have a lot of closings, they may need to go back 8 months, 9 months. But let's start with 6 and see where we are. If we have enough closed comps within the last 6 months that we can consider, or the appraiser can consider. The location of the comps. You know, we want to do, I mean, if you're downtown, maybe you could do a 1/4 mile radius, maybe you could do a 1/2 mile radius search. If you're in a subdivision, maybe you can just search for properties within that subdivision. If you're out rural, you may need to go out a couple miles. So there is no, you know, tried and true method to that. It depends on the density of where the subject property is. But we want things that are close by. I could put, or the appraiser could put a value on a home in Winston-Salem. Pick that home up and move it to Kernersville. You've changed the value just because you've changed the location. So we want to start with a tight location, things that are close by. Physical features they're looking for: bedrooms, bathrooms, square footage, size of the lot. Is there a fireplace? Is there a garage? Is there a basement? Remember, you start by studying the subject property and finding those special features, those physical features, like what makes a subject property unique, what makes it, and then finding the comps to match as closely as you can to those physical features. And then terms and conditions of sale. I don't want to, the appraiser's not going to want to compare a traditional sale to a foreclosure, for example. So if we don't have it, if the neighborhood hasn't suffered a lot of foreclosures and they just have one, that one foreclosure probably wouldn't be a good comp, because generally speaking, foreclosures go for less than traditional sales. Question about fireplaces. Absolutely. Could that be personal property? I guess if it's not installed, it's kind of off to the side. Again, we're just study the subject property, learn about the subject property, and then find comps that are as close to the subject property as they can. Would they count that as value to the property? And the answer is, it depends. Remember on Tuesday, we introduced you to this unit. We said an appraisal is an appraiser's opinion. So you could have one appraiser that thinks the fireplace is important and take that into consideration. You could have another appraiser that doesn't think it's important and take that into consideration. This is why we said you could have two different appraisers' opinions. You could have two different, it's whatever the appraiser determines is important to study with that property. Now, the good news is for us, remember, we're not an appraisal school. We're not here to get our appraisal license. So they have to give you the information to use. They also have to give you the value. So they're going to tell you what the cost of a bedroom is. They're going to tell you what the cost of a fireplace is if they want you to use it. If you want to learn how to determine the cost of a fireplace or the value of a fireplace, that's when you go to appraiser school. So studying that subject, and then we're looking for those comps nearby. Our comps need to be as similar to the subject property as possible. The fewer adjustments made, the better the comp. I'll say that again. The fewer adjustments made, the better the comp. We want things that are recently sold. Again, I'd say on average, we start about 6 months, but a lot of times, guys, it depends on the market. If we've not had a lot of closings in the last 6 months, we may need to go back further to find those good comps. The appraiser is the one that gets to assign a dollar value to the differences. Again, the appraiser knows what the cost of a bedroom is, what the cost of a fireplace, a square foot. We're going to look at a sample in just a second. And then the appraiser does a correlation. They don't just do simple averaging. Correlation is a weighted average. So what does the appraiser put the most emphasis on? Is it square footage? Is it bedrooms? What's going to have the most value in their opinion, in their mind, to give that correlation, that weighted average? I'd like you guys to turn with me in your book, the section about sales comparison approach, on page 469, or it's figure 17.2. And what we're looking at on 469 is a sample sales comparison approach. So we first studied the subject property. Our subject property is 155 Potter Drive, and that's the one that we're trying to determine value, that we're trying to assign a value to. So we studied the features of 155 Potter Drive. It's at a good location. It's 6 years old. Here's the size of our lot. It's a brick ranch, 3-bed, 1.5 bath, 1,500 square feet, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they went through and noted all of the features of the subject property. And then this appraiser went out and found 5 comps. Now, generally speaking, they say if the appraiser can use 3 or 4, they don't want too many that could affect things. We definitely don't want too few. This one might just be a little over ambitious and found 5. So we have comp A, B, C, D, and E. We know what a buyer was willing to pay for each of these comps. And that's the first line we have there under each, the sales price. We know that a buyer was willing to pay $118,000 for comp A because that's what it closed at. That's the closed price of the property. Then we make adjustments to the things in the comps that are different than the subject. So the appraiser's gone through, for example, comp B. The location is poorer than the subject property. So you have location and subject property. Comp B is poorer. What are you going to do to make it match? You're going to add. You're going to add that value, that difference in the condition. Comp A, the exterior condition of the subject property is average. They say comp A, the exterior condition is better. So your subject is average, comp A is better. How do we make that match? What's the adjustment that we make? We deduct. So we're making, or the appraiser, I should say, is making these monetary adjustments to get the comps to match the subject. Again, I think this is worth saying again. The theory, the whole basis behind the sales comparison approach is that we can determine what a buyer might be willing to pay for a subject property because we know what they were willing to pay for those comps. So once we make a few comps, adjustments to the comps, get them closer to the subject property, then based on that, we should have an idea of what a buyer would be willing to pay for the subject. I think I mentioned earlier, we also want similar type property. Like it's really not fair to compare a 2nd-story condo to a 2-story brick ranch, to a 2-story brick home. Makes sense? It's not fair to compare a single family home to a townhome or something like that. So we want similar types, condo to condo, townhome to townhome, etc. If you look in the little paragraph under the sales comparison approach, we can see that the appraiser, based on his sales comparison approach, determined that the value for the subject property would be 116,500. And that's because comp D, they had no adjustments to make. Comp A, they only had a slight adjustment to make. There are much more adjustments, much greater adjustments in like B and C. So those may not be the best comps, but we definitely want to take all that into, the appraiser is going to take all that into consideration. And we're going to do a sample in just a second as well. So let's take your appraiser hat off for a second. Last week we introduced, or last class, we introduced you to the CMA, or the comparative market analysis, maybe also referred to as the BPO, broker price opinion. The appraiser does a sales comparison approach, adjusts the comps to match the subject to determine value. Remember, only the appraiser gets to use the word value. And when the appraiser is offering their opinion of value, they're going to give a specific number. You and I do not get to say value. You and I get to say probable sales price or probable lease price. And when we report, we're going to report as a range. We're not going to give a specific number. We're just going to give them a range. So if, for example, the sales comparison approach that we were just looking at was the CMA, I'd be sitting at this listing appointment and I would look at my seller and say, based on my CMA, I'd say your probable sales price is between 112,000 and 119,500. Are we going to fall on the lower end of the range or the higher end of the range? Well, the answer to that is it depends. What's the condition of the subject property as it relates to the comps? MLS has a history. It keeps everything from the day it was founded, like back in the mid-90s. It has every listing that's ever been in the Triad MLS. Now, we're not going to go back that far, obviously, but I say that to say there's a database. There's your research right there is through our MLS. And another cool thing about MLS, if they were loaded, we can see pictures. And especially helpful to see pictures of comps, those recently sold comps. So when you look at your seller and say, you know, based on the condition of your home, based on these comps, I'd say we're going to be closer to the 112,000 range. And the seller says, why? Well, these other comps have an updated kitchen. They have an updated bathroom. This most expensive comp here, comp B, they've got new paint, new carpet. They have a new roof, right? That's why they're on the higher end of the range. Your kitchen still has avocado green appliances. Your bathroom hasn't seen a hammer in like 30 years. No paint, no carpet. Roof is 20 years old. You're on the lower end of the range. So where in the range we fall depends on where it lies within the comps. Is it better than the products out there, or is it similar or the same? So the CMA that we do is an informal version of the sales comparison approach. When we're doing CMAs, and y'all, this is a click of a button in MLS. I just made it sound really easy, didn't I? This thing comes with training. It comes with experience. The first couple of times you do CMAs, your BIC will be with you. I know the Winston-Salem Board of Realtors offers CMA training about once a quarter. So you may want to get in on that. It takes time. I'll go ahead and tell you guys right now, you can clickety-click and make these things generate whatever you want. You can make these CMAs say whatever you want to. Is that always what's the best service for my client? So being able to competently perform these things takes time, and rest assured you'll get training. When we're doing a CMA, let's say we're getting ready for a listing appointment and we're doing a CMA. Also, when I'm talking to the seller, we're going to look at things that are currently for sale, things that are on the market, things that are active. Why is that important to me when I'm getting ready to list a property with a seller? Why are current listings important?
Competition.
That's my competition, isn't it? I want to know what we're up against. So if the guy across the street's on the market, we want to study his property too to know what our direct competition is. I think for sellers, it comes down to two different things: time versus money. If they want a lot of money, then we need to price it competitively, the guy across the street. If they need to get out fast, then we need to price under that. But you looking at those active listings will help us see what we're up against. The other thing that we do that the appraiser does not is we also look at expired listings, things nearby that expired. They never sold. They went on the market and they didn't sell. Why is that important to me? It's a pretty good indication if it's expired.
Maybe cost comparison?
It overpriced?
Maybe it was overpriced. I can't tell you for sure. I wasn't the listing agent, but this is what I know. At this price, they didn't sell. So if you have a seller, remember we said last class that value's in the eye of the beholder, and to the seller, this is their home. To everybody else in the world, it's just a house. Please understand, coming into this, the seller has more value. But by us showing them the CMAs, by us showing, look, your neighbor listed for this and they never sold. A buyer wasn't willing to pay that price. If we can use expired listings in our CMAs, then that will help these conversations as well. The seller determines the list price. I provide the facts for them to make an informed decision. So when we're doing these CMAs, we want to make sure that we're looking at the neighborhood. We're studying the closed, the expired, the currents. We don't have a Zoom ID. You should just be able to click on the link. CMAs need to be kept current. Reach out to Jane if you need to, or Lane. I'm not sure what's going on there. Does it matter how long the comps were made on the home? Again, we don't want to go back too far. So they say about 6 months. We only want to go back a bit because the market fluctuates, right? So things that closed 3 years ago mean absolutely nothing today. CMAs need to be kept current. So whenever you're doing, what's the new term for it? A price improvement. It used to be a price decrease, but now we're calling it a price improvement. You know, like change the words there. Let's say you've been on the market for a couple months. You've not had much interest. Your seller says, we need to do something. Do you think we need to do a price improvement? Do you think we need to lower the price? Well, if you've been on the market for 3 months, something has happened in the market within those last 3 months. Those comps that you used the first time you pulled it may have fallen off, and you may have new comps now to look at. So whenever you talk price to the seller, we need to do a new CMA. That's what we mean. It needs to be kept current. And CMAs are a client level service. Clients get not only the CMA, but they get interpretation of it. We get to sit down and have a conversation and tell them what it means. Customers, I can give a customer market data, but customers don't get interpretation. That's the difference in first class and coach. Customers, I can say, here's a piece of paper. You tell me what you want to do. Clients get the explanation. They get the interpretation. They get the benefit of my experience and me being able to explain it to them. I got more to say about this, but I also really want to watch our time too. So let's go ahead and take our break. We come back, we'll talk more about sales comparison approach, and grab your calculator because we're going to do just a little bit of math. I'm going to take attendance. We're going to talk more about the sales comparison approach and adjusting these comps. The CMA is what we do. And again, it's awfully similar. The difference is value versus that probable sales price. And I'd say there's more information on our CMA because the appraiser doesn't study current listings. The appraiser doesn't study expired listings. But again, that kind of helps us have these conversations with the seller. The other thing I want to say, when we're doing our CMAs, we can see property that's under contract. I don't know the contract price. That price is not advertised. All we know is what it's listed for. And then when it closes, we find out what it's sold for. But we can also use the under contracts because we know at this price, that seller got a contract. That seller was able to get a buyer under contract. But to help us to determine that probable sales price and to help the appraiser determine value, they're looking at those closed comps. So what's all this mean for us? Well, like I said, you guys, these things take practice. We're just introducing them to you here. We're not teaching you how to do a CMA in pre-licensing. We're introducing you to the theory, to the concept of it. It won't be until you get out in the real world that you get to do some for fun. Again, your BIC will be with you, or maybe they'll assign you to we call them seasoned agents. Those that have been around a while and pull these things over and over and over again. The commission's going to hold us accountable if we don't do these things competently. There's license law and commission rule that addresses CMAs and BPOs. You'll get more into the law and the rule when you get into post-licensing. But we need to make sure we're doing these things competently as part of our job. So as mentioned earlier, I'm not kidding when I say you can go on MLS and you can make this thing generate any way you want. You can sway these numbers any way you want. Is that doing a service to your client? Is that helping them? And that's what we mean by doing these things competently. So I encourage you to take advantage of any training that your local board of realtors may offer. Again, get with your BIC, etc. Any questions before we kind of look at the math piece? So a couple things, our appraiser hat back on. Back to the sales comparison approach. Remember, we're not determining value. And for your test, they have to tell you what the value is. So I don't want anybody to worry about that. We are not here to learn how to put value on a fireplace. They've got to give you that amount for your exam. From the appraiser's point of view, though, one way that they might be able to determine, for example, value of a bedroom is to study the comps. So not only is the appraiser the expert of their market, not only is the appraiser knowing what's going on in the area that they're appraising and what the values of things are in their area, but they may also study comps. So for example, if this appraiser is studying a comp that has 3 bedrooms that sold for $250,000, and then they study another comp with 4 bedrooms that sold for $254,500, no other major differences. Yes, there are going to be other differences, but no other major differences. The appraiser may determine that the cost of a bedroom is $4,500 based on the difference of comps. So when the appraiser's out doing their thing, they're studying the neighborhood, they're studying the market, they're studying the property, they're also studying the comps to help them determine what those values are. So what we're going to see for our exam, it's going to look something like this. It's going to tell us the information on the subject property. Here's some information on comp 1, and here's some information on comp 2. Then it's going to tell us these values. So it's going to tell us the bedroom goes for $4,500, the bathroom goes for $4,000, and the fireplace goes for $2,000. For your exam, when you guys are doing these, I suggest setting yourself up in nice, neat columns and rows, very similar to what we saw on page 469. So you have your subject property, you have your comps. Let's see, let me do this. I got you. Thank you. So here's our subject property. Here's our comp 1, and then our comp 2. And then the things that we're studying. So we know we got the bedrooms, the bathrooms, and the fireplace. So if we go through, study the subject property, my subject has 3 bedrooms, it has 2 baths, and it has a fireplace. Then we study comp 1. It has 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, no fireplace. It recently sold for $118,000. And then comp 2, we're told, has 4 bedrooms, 2 baths, it has a fireplace, and it recently sold for $126,000. To me, utilizing my blank scratch paper and putting this information, taking that few seconds to put this in rows and columns is a lot easier to sort through and work out than it is reading that paragraph. So if you see this easier, and you can abbreviate, I mean, you can do this on your scratch paper pretty quickly. So you and I are going to adjust comp 1 together, and then I'm going to let you guys adjust comp 2. So let's just focus. We always study a comp to the subject. And remember, we're only making adjustments to the comp. So my subject property has 3 bedrooms. Comp 1 has 3 bedrooms. Do we have any adjustments to make? No, we're good there, aren't we? My subject property has 2 bathrooms. Comp 1 has 1. Do I have an adjustment to make? What do I need to do? I need to add. I need to add to comp 1 the value of a bathroom, which the problem tells me is $4,000. By adding the value of the bathroom, I have adjusted the comp to match the subject. So we added $4,000 to account for a bathroom. Then my subject has a fireplace and comp 1 does not. So again, what do we need to do to make those match? We need to add. So we're going to take the value of that fireplace and we're going to add $2,000. So based on our research, it sold for $118,000. That's what a buyer is willing to pay for it. But once we make some adjustments, once we make the comp match the subject, we can expect that had this buyer bought this exact same house, only with another bathroom and a fireplace, they would have paid $124,000. We adjusted the comp to match the subject. Now, what I want you guys to do is do the same thing with comp 2. Study comp 2 as it relates to the subject and tell me in a private chat, go ahead and set your chats to private before you start working. Tell me in a private chat, what would the adjusted value of comp 2 be? The adjusted value of comp 2. About 30 more seconds, and we'll talk about comp 2. So let's study comp 2 as it relates to the subject. Nothing to do with comp 1, just comp 2 as it relates to the subject. So do the hand trick with me. The subject has 3 bedrooms. Comp 2 has 4. What do we do to make comp 2 match the subject? We deduct. We have to deduct the cost of a bedroom. The problem tells me the bedroom, the appraisers determined that a bedroom goes for $4,500. The subject property has 2 baths. Comp 2 has 2 baths. Do we have to make any adjustments? Subject has 1 fireplace. Comp 2 has 1 fireplace. Do we need to make any adjustments? So we're good, right? Just that one adjustment. So the buyer bought this property for $126,000. We adjust for the fact that they don't have, that the comp has an extra bedroom. And once we make that adjustment, we get an adjusted value of comp 2 of $121,500. Now the question wants to know what's the probable sales price. When you see that, you know you're doing a CMA, right? Because that's what we determine. What if the question said, what's the value? Now you're doing a sales comparison approach. That's a big difference between the two. With the probable sales price, we could report this as a range. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, based on my research, I think your probable sales price is going to be between $121,500 and $124,000. Let's list it at fill in the blank. We wanted to list it a little bit more than what we think the probable sales price is going to be. Please note what we are predicting is probable sales price, not list price. So based on the probable sales price, this is going to help us determine what to list it for. And we do want to allow, it depends on the market. For example, if you're in a seller's market, you probably get a little bit more, higher list price. If you're in a buyer's market, you may need to adjust for that. You know, we do want a little bit of wiggle room, I guess, for negotiations in case the buyer doesn't come in right at asking price. How much higher do you go? The answer to all that is it depends. It depends on the market. It depends on the condition. It depends on the seller. Like we said, it always comes down to time versus money. Had this problem said, what is the value? The appraiser has to report it as a value. And they're not going to just do simple averaging. So in other words, they're not going to add these up and divide by 2 and say this is the value. The correlation says they're going to put the most weight on the one that is most similar to the subject. So in looking in comp 1 and comp 2, which one had fewer adjustments? Which one is most similar to the subject? Comp 2, right? Because we didn't have to pick our calculator up as much with comp 1. So the appraiser would put more value on comp 2. Their correlation would be closer to the 121.5 than it would the 124 because comp 1 isn't as similar to the subject as comp 2. What questions do we have? Always adjust the comps to match the subject. I just throw 2 absolute words at you, didn't I? Never, ever adjust the subject. You always adjust the comps to match the subject. You guys very well. So let's go back to probable sales price. So let's say you have a probable sales price 121.5 to 124. This is your range. And the seller looks at you and says, that's fine and dandy, but let me go ahead and list it. I want to list it for 165. It's kind of higher than what my numbers say, right? That's kind of higher than what my CMA says. Remember, you guys, the seller determines the listing price. And this is what I have to say to you. If you don't believe in your heart of hearts that you can sell this property for 165, you may be better off walking away. You may be better off thanking the seller for their time Otherwise, you may be spending time, money, energy, selling a property that I don't know much about life, but one thing I do know is the numbers don't lie. And when you're looking at that CMA, nothing on that CMA tells me that I can sell their home for 165. I have a decision to make right now, don't I? If this seller is set on 165, but I can't see how we could possibly get them more than 124, that's a huge difference. We're not close, are we? So you have a decision to make. I'm getting questions in the chat. Have I ever walked away? Yes, I have, because I didn't feel that I could do it. And again, it takes time and money and energy to list somebody's house for sale. So if you don't believe that you can sell it, you have a decision to make. Does that make sense? Again, the numbers don't lie. You're handing the seller a piece of paper. I understand, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, that you have more value in your home. I understand what you want to get from it, but the comps don't support it. And there's been a couple times that, maybe not like this, but yeah, some big differences. And I've gone back to the office and I've pulled, even as seasoned as I am, I've pulled seasoned agents. I've pulled, sometimes two heads is better than one. So pulling other people in from your office saying, what am I missing? What can I do? And yeah, I've thanked sellers for their time. And Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I just truly do not believe I can sell your home for you to get what it is that you want. Best of luck to you. Questions?
Yes, question.
Yeah.
Let's say you the comps that you got, they were from previous month, like what happened were in a seller's market, like you were saying, it was ridiculous. And houses sold for that value, but in a seller's market, it goes up.
Yep.
So if the person wants to sell their house at that price, will you still walk away, or you just, hey, it's a seller's market, will you take it?
That's up to you, Benjamin. And sometimes that's a decision we have to make, right? So if this was 2 years ago, I very well may look at the seller and be like, 165, easy. I very well, what's the neighborhood? What's the market? What's the condition? And those are all things that we have to take into consideration. If it's a buyer's market, absolutely not. If that's that strong seller's market. But guys, consider this. Even in that very strong, that crazy seller's market that we're coming out of, I will say from my experience, most homes were priced appropriately. It was the buyer that was driving the price up because the buyer was offering $75,000 more than listing price. So the seller, for the most part, there were some excited sellers out there. I'll say that. But I'd say for the most part, the seller was listing it right based on the CMA. It was the buyer trying to outbid everybody else that got in for. And even the homes that were, for lack of a better word, we'll call them overpriced, buyers could see right through that. And even in the crazy sellers markets, those homes weren't moving as fast as those that were priced right. So having this conversation with your seller about pricing it right, remember what we talked about on Tuesday, you guys. We're all consumers. It doesn't matter what kind of market it's in, we're all consumers. And if we look at a price tag and we can't justify that price, are we going to buy it? Probably not. Now, if I want to negotiate and drive the price up, that's on me, isn't it? Does that make sense? So even then, having that conversation with that seller, but this is where we've been saying we need to be the experts of the market, not just what's going on in real estate, but the area that you want to work, the trends, knowing the things that are going on. So not only can we help the seller price it right, but so you can decide if it's worth attempting it, trying it for 165, for example. Can I erase the pink? Everybody good? Please remember, the sales comparison approach is the best approach when the appraiser is trying to put value on single family home and land. They may use one of the other two approaches that we're getting ready to talk about, but they will put the most value on the sales comparison approach when it's a single family home and vacant land. That's what we mean by that. Questions on the sales comparison approach? Remember what we said too. Let's back up. Let's tie this together. Hang on. I thought of something else. Let's say the seller talks you into listing it for 165. You say, fine, we'll do it your way. 165 it is. And we go under contract. You know what your comps just said, right? 121 something to 124, which is our probable sales price, which is about what it's going to appraise for. If we're doing it right, we're going to determine about what it's going to appraise for. Remember the lender's loan to value ratio? How do they determine value? I'm seeing mouths move. Yeah, it's the sales price or the appraised amount, whichever's less. So if you go in advertising more than what you think it's going to appraise for, you're almost setting the buyer up to not be able to complete unless they have money in the bank, because the lender will only issue the loan on whichever is less, the appraised amount or the sales price. So there's a lot to take into consideration there. Again, we're just introducing you to it, and where are we pre-licensing? We're just introducing you to it. Please, please, please take advantage of any kind of CMA training you can get yourself in. It's really interesting. The second approach that the appraiser may take to value is called the cost approach. So we've talked about the sales comparison approach. So let's talk about the cost approach. The cost approach is best when we're trying to determine, the appraiser is trying to determine value on special use properties. Special use properties, think schools, churches, libraries, hospitals. They don't sell every day, do they? We don't have recently sold comps nearby. So the cost approach would be best for those special use properties. Please make a note. Cost approach is also best for new construction. When you're building a new subdivision, when you're building new construction, let's say you clear land, you're a developer, you clear land and you start building a new development, and the only thing nearby was built in, I don't know, the next neighborhood was built in the 60s. Is it fair to compare a home that was built in the 60s to a home that will be built this year? It was a different time back in the 60s, wasn't it? So we may not be able to pull in comps isn't going to do us any good because you have such a wide age range there. So new construction, until we can get some comps in that development, new construction would best be used cost approach as well. The theory behind the cost approach is to separate the land and the structure. So we're going to put value on the land as if it were vacant. Pretend that the land does not have a structure. If you were just to sell the dirt, what would you sell that for? And then we're going to put value on the structure. And a big question, the value of the structure says, if we were to build this structure today, how much would it cost me? With today's labors and materials and products, how much would it cost me to build it today? Once we put a dollar amount on the land as if it were vacant, and we put a dollar amount on the structure as if we were going to build it today, we can add those two together, and there's our cost approach. Putting value on the land, we've already said we can use the sales comparison approach. As long as we have closed comps nearby of vacant land, we could use the sales comparison approach. There's a couple other methods the appraiser may use as well that we'll talk about. But let's talk about putting value on the structure. As I just said, the value on the structure answers the question, if we were to build this church new today, what would we build it for? And there's a couple different ways we can tackle that. The reproduction cost of the structure, if you were to build an exact duplicate at today's prices, With the reproduction costs, think historic buildings. You're building it exactly like it was built back in the 30s, but you're just building it today. What would it cost you to build that today? Replacement cost of the structure is not a duplicate, but it serves the same purpose. Again, when you built that school in the 60s and now you're building a school today, there's big differences there, aren't they? In the 60s, schools had typewriter rooms. We don't see those today, do we? Today we have computer labs, right? I mean, there's just different things today that we didn't have. So we're still building a school. It's a school for a school, serving the same purpose, but it's not an exact duplicate. So I mentioned a couple other methods for land if we don't have recently sold closed comps. One thing for land and the structure that the appraiser may take into consideration is the cost, or excuse me, the square foot method, which just says is cost per square foot times the number of square feet. So may this be for land, may this be for the structure. We're going to find out how much does each square foot cost per square foot, refresher from unit 4. And then times it by the number of square feet. So for example, if you have a cost per square foot, so the cost per square foot, every single square foot we determine cost 60, whoops, what did I just do? Cost, there it is, $65. Cost per square foot, every square foot costs $65. And we determine that there are 1,500 square feet. We could just figure out, using the square foot method, 1,500 times 65 would give us a cost of this building for $97,500. Yes, the problem has to give you this information. So literally figuring out how much each square foot costs to build, the material, the labor, the supplies, the overhead, and then determining how much or how many square feet we have. Other methods that we don't see as much, and I don't want you guys to get bogged down in, there's something called a unit in place method. This is the construction cost per unit of measure. So it's a construction cost per unit. The quantity survey method is the raw materials. We're looking at those raw materials that are coming in off the back of the truck. And the installation costs. Very similar, but the square foot method gives us a more accurate number, which is why it's more commonly used. And we'll see an example of the square foot method in just a second. Now that we've put a cost on the structure, remember what we said, we're putting the cost on the structure as if it were new, but it's not. So we need to take into consideration that it's not new. And what we need to take into consideration is something called depreciation. How much has the building depreciated? Depreciation is just the loss in value. Over time, things depreciate. Over time, things lose value. So we put a cost on it as if we were building it new, and now we're going to depreciate it to get it where it actually is. So it's a loss in value for any reason. And there are 3 different types of depreciation that the appraiser will take into consideration when doing the cost approach. And we're going to break each of these down. So the first type of depreciation is physical deterioration. This is just ordinary wear and tear. And there are 2 types of ordinary wear and tear, 2 types of physical deterioration. The first type is curable physical deterioration. This means it's economically feasible to fix it. Slapping a new coat of paint on a building is curable physical deterioration. It's economically feasible and you'll get your money back. It's just reasonable. Think of routine maintenance. You own structures, you own properties, you just got to do things to them. So curable is economically feasible. It's amazing what a fresh coat of paint can do, isn't it? It is amazing. The other type of physical deterioration then is incurable, which means the cost to fix it is not worth it because you won't get the money back. Structural issues, for example, could be an example of incurable physical deterioration. Structural issues get very expensive. I'm not a structural engineer. I need to qualify that. But if I were a buyer's agent, my buyer were looking at this home, I would strongly recommend that they talk to a structural engineer. I'm not sure that I want to go in this home. Next gust of wind is going to knock it down, right? This could be incurable. You could sink all the money into fixing it, but are you going to get your money back? Incurable deterioration says it's just not worth it. And again, I really feel the need to qualify and say, I'm not a structural engineer, but this does not look good to me. You guys see dollar signs all over this? Then we have functional obsolescence. Functional obsolescence are kind of changes in styles, changes in patterns, different things come and go. Curable functional obsolescence, again, it's an outdated design, but it can be fixed. Shag carpet, making a comeback. My bedroom growing up had blue shag carpet. I wished it looked this pretty. We're not seeing much shag carpet anymore, are we? The avocado kitchen I've mentioned. The 70s green, orange, and yellow. Woo! Pretty color schemes. Those are curable functional obsolescence. They're out of date, but they can be easily updated, feasibly and economically updated. Incurable functional obsolescence then are outdated designs that can't be easily economically feasible to update. This is a cute little house, isn't it? It's had some exterior updates. This is the little house I found in MLS a couple years ago. Why is this house incurable? Well, it was built in the 1920s. It's a different time back in the 1920s. This little house is a 4-bed, 1-bath. When it was built in the 1920s, the whole house shared a bathroom, didn't we? Today, we all want our own. Is it economically feasible to add a second bath? I don't know. Can you get your money back? If not, it would be incurable. Another good example of incurable is if the property doesn't have central AC. Maybe they have AC window units. Is installing central AC? It's an outdated design, but is it feasible, economically feasible to get your money back? The last piece of depreciation that the appraiser will look at is economic obsolescence, and there's only one kind. All economics obsolescence is incurable. These are your outside surroundings. There's nothing you can do about these. Where's my Winston-Salem people? You're looking at a picture. If you go down Griffith Road's at Haynes Mall. It's the one that runs behind Village Tavern. You know where Village Tavern is? You go down Griffith Road, keep going, and eventually it dead ends into Clemensville Road. What you're looking at is the intersection of Clemensville Road and Griffith Road, which is a sewer treatment plant. This is an economic obsolescence. You walk outside in a neighborhood in a hot August day, it does not smell good. There's nothing you can do about it. Homes near landfills, for example, those are economic obsolescence. We need to take that into, or the appraiser needs to take that into consideration. It's outside of the property boundaries, but it's some kind of economic or environmental. And again, economic obsolescences are always incurable. Nothing we can do about it. You have a choice. You either buy in a neighborhood near a sewer treatment plant, or you find somewhere else to buy. You either buy in a neighborhood near a landfill, or you find somewhere else to buy. We had a pre-pandemic, we had an alternate classroom out here. If our main classroom wasn't available, then we would go somewhere else and have classroom. A couple times I would teach in the summer, and I remember sitting in my car, getting my breath, and then run around, get my bag, get my purse, running inside. I was trying really hard not to breathe in the parking lot because it never, ever, ever smelled good. We might have been in the same place. Who knows? Yeah, that's right. You can't go outside for lunch, can you? It's like that. Yep. Also with the cost approach, the age life method looks at the building's useful life. Like how many years do we expect this building to have value? Now, I'm not saying after that so many years it's going to fall down, but it just doesn't have the value that it did when it was new. The economic life is, I mean, kind of similar, but it's how much we have left in that value. So let's say, for example, the age life method, let's say they expect it to have value for 30 years. We are 15 years into it. So the economic life says it has 15 more years that it can still have value. Again, I'm not saying it's going to fall down after 30 years, but what I'm saying is after 30 years, it's depreciated out. You don't have that value. Just some verbiage with the cost approach. And when it comes to depreciation, the accountant, this is an accountant tool, they usually use for depreciation what's referred to as a straight line method, which just means it loses the same amount of value each year. So if this is our timeline, and let's say we put an age life on it of, I don't know, 30 years. So we say this building is good for 30 years. The building is valued at 500,000. We know it's good for 30 years. So if we take that 500,000, divide it by 30 years, straight line depreciation says every single year it's going to depreciate by $16,667. Year one, it's going to depreciate by $16,667. Year 2, year 5, year 23. Each year it loses the same amount. Straight line depreciation. It's easier, the simplest way to determine that depreciation. So back to the age life method. It's got value for 30 years. We're 15 years into it. Our economic life says we have, 15 years left. So we could say we're halfway through. So we still have 250,000 in value before it just stops having value, loses that value. It's not new anymore after 30 years. So let's look again in your book. I'm on page 471, or I'm on figure 17.3. And we have a sample cost approach to value, and we'll do one as well. But the first thing this appraiser did was they put value on the land. So they used the cost per square foot method. They said the lot is 60 by 135. It's $450 per front foot. So you remember the front foot is the first dimension given, length times width. Front foot is your length, or 60. So if you say 60 times 450, you get land valuation of $27,000. And then you have site improvements. There's a driveway and landscaping, etc. So you have site improvements of $8,000. So putting a value on the land as if it were vacant, we would value the land of $35,000. Then we're going to, or the appraiser is going to value the structure. They're going to use the replacement cost. So 1,500 square feet, $65 per square feet. So again, if we were to build this thing new today, we'd be looking at $97,500. Deduct for some depreciation. It needs a coat of paint. You got some structural issues. You got a functional obsolescence. So once you deduct for depreciation, you have a building valued at 81,750. So we put a value on the land, we put a value on the structure. And when we add the two together, the cost approach says that the value today will be $116,750. Again, cost approach is the best method when the appraiser is determining value for special use properties. But because of the way that it's designed, the appraiser can always use the cost approach. They have three, and they're encouraged to use as many of the three as they can. So they can almost always use the cost approach because we can put value on the land, value on the building, and then determine what it would be worth today using the cost approach. So an easier formula for the structure. Start with your replacement or production cost. Deduct the depreciation. So whatever the replacement square foot method is what we just looked at. Deduct the depreciation. Again, the problem has to tell you. And then add to it the land, whatever the land is valued at in the site improvements. And that'll give the appraiser the value of this property as determined by the cost approach. We have one we're going to work together when we come back from break. I will say this. I think of the math in this unit, I think the sales comparison, I can almost guarantee you're going to see a sales comparison approach. I think after that, you got a better chance of seeing the third approach that we're going to talk about. I don't know that you'll see cost approach, but I do want to go through a problem with you guys so you'll have it, you'll be exposed to it, and we'll work through that when we come back from break. So let's go ahead and take 10. We come back, we'll look at our cost approach, and then we'll talk about our final approach to value. I am going to take attendance. And let's look at this cost approach problem together again, just to give you an understanding. We have the formula. Is another one of these that can just be worded a couple different ways, but the gist of it, what we're looking for here is the information we need to find the replacement or production cost, deduct from that depreciation, and then add to it the land and site improvements. So let's see what we got. Let's put this thing in practice. So a building has an estimated replacement cost of $150 per square foot. The building has 3,000 square feet. Land is estimated at 400,000. Site improvements have been estimated value of 120,000. The appraiser has determined that the building has an effective age of 10 years and a useful life of 40. Using the cost approach, what would the appraiser determine the value of this building being? So let's start. I like to start with the land first, just because it tends to be a little bit easier. So let's start with the land first. When we're putting value on the land, it tells me that the land is estimated at 400,000. And then we have site improvements of 120,000. So when we add all that up, I get the land valued at 520,000. The land valued as if it were vacant. There's no structure. All we're doing is looking at the dirt and the site improvements. So sidewalks, has it been plumbed, electrical, driveways, etc. So now that we've determined the land value of 520,000 as if it were separate, now let's look at the structure. To find the replacement cost, I know that each square foot goes for $150. Every single square foot costs $150. And there are 3,000 square feet. So if each square foot costs $150 and there are 3,000 square feet, if we were to build this thing new today, it would cost us roughly $450,000. It's not new though. It has 10 years of depreciation into its useful life. So these people have determined the useful life is 40 years. The effective age says we're 10 years into that, which means of the 40 years, we've used 10 years. So if we look at 40, it's 0.25 or 25%. So in looking at the useful age and looking at how far into it we are, we can determine that it's depreciated. It has lost so far, it has lost 25%. So we looked at the effective age divided by the useful life. A calculator gave me 0.25. Move that decimal over 2 places. We got 25% depreciation. Back to my structure, if I want to deduct 25%. So we can say 450,000 minus 25%, which means where are we now with 30 years left on it? We still have 337,500. So if we were building it today, we put a value of 450,000 on it. It's not brand new though, it's 10 years old. So it's already suffered 25% depreciation. When we deduct that 25% depreciation, what it's actually valued at today is 337,500. And then we just add the land and the structure to get the cost approach of value of this building. Whoops. Sorry, that should be, yeah, no. That, okay. So this building today would be 857,500. Again, back it up, big picture. Put value on the land. It's more important to me that you guys understand the concept of this than it is the math. But we put value on the land. We put value on the structure, taking into account depreciation. not depreciation, the effective age. They didn't tell us depreciation, so I have nothing to depreciate. And then we just add the land and the structure together. So the appraiser would determine using the cost approach that this property is worth 857,500. Questions? Put that in a visual. That's a great point. Thank you. Land doesn't depreciate. Land doesn't lose value. Structures come and go, but the land doesn't use value. What's that old saying? Buy land, they're not making any more of it. Have you guys ever heard that? Buy land, they're not making any more of it. Land doesn't lose value. Great question. Thank you. Only the structure, only the building depreciates. So to put what we're saying in a visual, you put a value on the land, put a value on the structure, and bring them back together. And there's our cost approach. Cost approach is best for special use properties, churches, schools, libraries, hospitals. And make sure you have that written down. New construction. The appraiser can and often always will use the cost approach, but they may put more value on the sales comparison approach if it's a resale single family home. But they're trying to get several different numbers to get to approaches. They're trying several different approaches to get to that one piece of value. Can't see the bottom part. Yeah, I get not. Why not? Because my toolbar won't go away. So what does the bottom part say? It just says structure and land. There it is. Structure and land. So we start with the two, we separate them, and then we bring them back together. So sales comparison approach is best for single family homes and land. Cost approach is best for special use properties. The third approach to value that appraisers might take is the income capitalization approach, also known as the direct approach. This is the best approach for properties that produce an income or properties that collect rent. Apartment buildings, rental units, commercial buildings, think retail centers, malls, office parks. Anytime you have a tenant that pays rent, the income capitalization approach. And the theory behind the income capitalization approach says that its value can be determined based on how much rent it collects. So we're going to look at the rent to help us determine what it's worth. So income producing properties are best, or income capitalization approach is best for properties that collect rent. They produce an income. We're going to talk a little bit about the investor. We'll get to him in Unit 12. And we're actually going to see this again, because this is only, now we're talking about the appraiser, but this is also a handy tool for the investor when determining if this investment property is worth purchasing or not. And one thing to take into consideration is the net operating income. This helps the investor analyze how profitable this income producing property is. So we'll see the formula in just a second. But we're going to study how much rent we're collecting, and we're going to deduct our expenses. And what we have left is our net operating income. So it's our projected income after paying your expenses. The other thing that the income capitalization approach takes into consideration is the capitalization rate, also known as the investor's rate of return. This is kind of the investor's risk. What's their measurement of risk? And the capitalization rate, the desired rate of return can vary from investor to investor. There is no one set, this is a good cap rate. Let's say, for example, you are new to the investment game and you buy your very first investment property. All your eggs are in that basket, right? All of them. If that tenant doesn't pay rent that month, what you gonna get? Nothing. You have a high risk, right? Because you just have that one investment property. You're gonna have a high capitalization or low capitalization rate, excuse me. Now you've upped your portfolio, fast forward, you've upped your portfolio, and now you have 20 investment properties. You don't have as much risk in one, right? If you have 20 and one tenant doesn't pay, you got 19 others to back you up. So your rate of return is gonna be higher. So a couple formulas. These are going to be two-step problems. So the first step is going to be find the net operating income. Please go ahead and write this down, and then we're going to talk about what this means. And then we'll look at the second formula where we can use the T-bar. So jot this down so we can talk about it. Let's talk about what this first part of the formula means. The potential gross income, also referred to as the PGI. This is, let's say it's a large apartment building. If you have 100% occupancy, 100% of the time, this is the most you can make on this income producing property. All of your tenants pay on time, every time, you have no vacancies. It's the potential. It's the max that you can make. I call the PGI the dream. In a perfect world, we're collecting rent from all of our units every single month. By the way, before I forget, this formula is always solved annually. So if it gives you monthly rent, what do? Times it by 12. Please write that down. This formula is always solved annually. So we're talking about this year's potential gross income. Again, I call it the dream. I collect rent on all of my units every single month this year. Sounds nice, doesn't it? The reality is we suffer vacancy and collection losses. It's rare to have 100% occupancy 100% of the time. You could have the most perfect tenant in the whole wide world, but they may eventually move out, right? So we have to deduct for vacancy. Collection losses would be like if the landlord or the investor had to take a tenant to court to collect costs. So we deduct vacancy and collection losses, and what we're left with is our EGI, or our effective gross income. The PGI is the dream, the max I can make. The EGI is the reality. This is what I'm actually making. From our EGI, we deduct operating expenses. Operating expenses are things like maintenance, janitorial, utilities, landscaping, the things you need to run this apartment building. Please make a note. Not included in operating expenses is your monthly debt service or depreciation. Depreciation and monthly debt service or annual debt service, your debt service, is not included in operating expenses. If you were going to get a distractor on this problem, that would be my prediction. So if you're solving for NOI, do not include debt service or depreciation. Pretty much everything else is going to go under operating expenses. So from our EGI, we deduct our operating expenses, and that gives us our net operating income. Now on to the second formula in which we can use a T-bar. My net operating income is part of my value using my capitalization rate. The problem is going to ask you to either find the value or the cap rate, one or the other. It'll give you one and ask you for the other, and it'll give you the information that you need to find the net operating income. So step one is to find your NOI. Step two is to find value or cap rate, depending on what the problem's asking for. You guys know we like our acronyms, right? So one thing that you may want to use to help you remember this formula, here I go again, talking about food. Y'all think I like to eat? We think of a big plate of Oreos. Look at the first letters of each piece of the formula. And you can remember, I said acronym, but if you can remember the little saying, poor Violet eats Oreos nightly. Poor Violet eats Oreos nightly. That helps you keep this formula in order. PGI, vacancy and collection losses, EGI, operating expenses, net operating income. Poor Violet eats Oreos nightly. I don't think Violet's doing too bad if she's eating Oreos every night. It'll catch up to her though. So before we do one together, let's look at our sample. Turn with me in your book, page 475, or figure 17.5. We have our income capitalization approach. So there's our PGI with 100% capacity. 100% of the units are rented. My potential income, what's the max I can make on this property this year collecting rent, is $60,000. Add to that income from other sources. So this property has a vending machine on it. It has something called a pay phone on it. Gives us a couple hundred extra dollars, $600 there. So we add that together. The most I can make on this property this year is $60,600. That's not the reality though. That's the dream. From my PGI, I deduct a 4% vacancy and collection losses. Our reality, or our EGI, is $58,176. And then we deduct those annual operating expenses. Then we deduct those annual operating expenses. So there's your taxes and insurance, heat, maintenance, utilities, repairs, decorating, replacement of equipment, legal and accounting, advertising, management, etc. Again, please note, you do not see debt service. You do not see depreciation. When we get to unit 12, we're going to talk more about the investor. We're going to see this formula again, and we're going to take the net operating income to the next step. We're going to talk about deducting that debt service from our net operating income. But for right now, we're just stopping at the net operating income. So I deduct all that and I get an NOI of $30,876. The problem tells me that my desired capitalization rate is 10%. So net operating income divided by the capitalization rate gives me a value, $308,760. Again, the theory behind the income capitalization approach is that the value of this property is based off of how much rent do we collect? Because that's where it all starts, with our rent. Questions on this before we look at one? So I'm going to put a problem up for you guys to try if you want. If not, hang tight. I think you should at least try it, put pen to paper and try it. And then of course, we'll talk about it together. A fourplex means there's 4 units and each one rents per month. So make sure you're starting with your potential. Question comes in, this can be for commercial and residential? Yes, as long as the property's collecting rent. Retail centers, apartment building, rent collecting properties. And by the way, you can tell me in a private chat what your expected cap rate is. You got 1 more minute. And note, we're looking for a rate or a percent. we give you the value, we find the NOI. NOI divided by value is your capitalization rate. Okay. We'll see what we got. I know a few of you are waiting on me, and I understand it's sometimes helpful to see it, but I did want to give you guys just a few minutes. If you wanted to, try it on your own. So let's see what we got. Each unit of a fourplex rents for $650 per month. Vacancy losses average 10% per year. Operating expenses are $1,300 per month. The property is valued at $150,000. The question wants to know, what is the investor's expected capitalization rate? These are two-step problems, which means there's two different formulas, two different things that we need to do. And when I'm doing two-step problems, I generally like to start with where I'm going to end, because this is my focus. So with starting with where we're going to end, what's the problem asking me for? What am I ultimately trying to find? That capitalization rate. And we know rate of percent always goes in the bottom right of the T-bar. Knowing my formulas helps me to know the other two pieces. The other two pieces I need are the value, which it tells me. And then I also need to know the net operating income. Do I know the net operating income yet? Not yet. So now we know we need to use our other formula. So let's go back and gather what we need to do our net operating income. I have a fourplex, which means we have 4 units. Each unit rents for $650 per month. So each monthly rent on these 4 units is $2,600. These problems are always solved annually. So if monthly rent is $2,600, then annual rent is $31,200. This is our PGI. If I were collecting $650 from all 4 of these units every single month this year, how much am I collecting? $31,200. The PGI is the dream. 100% occupancy, 100% of the time. Questions so far? Is it realistic that I'll collect $31,200 this year on this property? No, because you know what investors deal with? Vacancy and collection losses. You're never going to have 100% occupancy. So we need to deduct what is our projected, or what is our vacancy losses. This year, we're expected to have a 10% vacancy loss. So if we go a little side note, where can I go? I'm going to go over here. So 31,200 minus or times, we'll say times 10%. Gives us $3,120. That is what I need to deduct for my vacancy and collection losses. Once I deduct that, then I get an EGI, an effective gross income of $28,080. So the dream is to collect $31,200 The truth is I have to deduct 10% vacancy, which means the reality, the EGI is my reality. So probably all I'm going to collect from this unit this year is $28,080. Questions on step 2, how I got the $28,080. Then we're told we have operating expenses of $1,300 per month. Remember, this problem is solved annually. So if my operating expenses, if my bills, if you will, are $1,300 per month, then we need to time that by 12 to get annual. So my annual operating expenses are 15,600. That's what I deduct from my EGI. These are my operating expenses. Deduct that from my EGI, and I get a net operating income of $12,480. That's the last piece that I need for my T-bar. So we started with our PGI minus our vacancy. To get our EGI, from that, I deducted my annual operating expenses to get my net operating income. And now that my T-bar is complete, back fourth line means divide. So you take your net operating income divided by our value to give us a cap rate of 0.0832 or a percent of 8.32%. Don't be shocked. So our NOI divided by value gave me a cap rate. My calculator gave me 0.0832. I moved my decimal over 2 places or multiplied by 100 and got a cap rate of 8.32%. Again, your test is going to give you 4 answer choices that are rates or percent. They cannot give you both. They're saying the same thing. So they're either going to be rate, which you get on calculator, or percent, 8.32%. Look at all my math nerds shining through. Love it. You're my people. T-bar fans, have I gotten you? Have I converted you? How many have I gotten? I don't have 100% yet. That's all right. We're not done. We're not done. Remember, that's my personal goal each class. Have you guys singing the wonder that is the T-bar by the time we're done. It's a good tool. I like it. What questions do I have on this? That's all right. That's right. Then it's just the formula, right? Net operating income divided by value or cap rate. Again, they're going to give you, let's look down here. They're going to give you the value or the cap rate. One of these will be an answer. The other one they'll have to give you. They will not give you the net operating income, which means you need to find that. And how do you find that? You have to know this formula. You have to know the formula to find the net operating income. So please, please, please put that on a flashcard. As mentioned, when we do investors math in unit 12, we're going to see this formula again. We're going to see this formula twice in 2 different situations. What does that mean to you? Is there a really good chance you could see it at least once on your test? Put this formula on a flashcard. Questions? Speaking of investors, another tool they may use is something called the gross rent multiplier, or the GERM. I call it the GERM. Let's say you're an investor and you are considering purchasing a income producing property, but you don't know the operating expenses. You don't know the income. You don't know what rent you're collecting. You're just you need some numbers to help you guesstimate. So the gross rent multiplier can kind of help the investor determine if this income producing property is worth purchasing or not. So we're going to look at, through the eyes of the investor, the expected rental income, the expected, how much we expect to collect. And we're going to compare that to the sales price. So what are you going to pay for it? And what's the rent that you expect to collect? Investors may generally use this on 1 to 4 unit residential income producing properties. And all it does is it answers the question, how long will it take me to get my money back? If I buy this investment property, how long is it going to take me to get my money back? So for the GERM, all you do is take the sales price, which you're planning on paying for it, and divide it by the expected rental income. Typically speaking, if investors are looking at commercial property, rental income will be annual. If they're looking at residential rental property, rental income will be monthly. So commercial property looks at annual rental income, and it answers the question, how many years before I get my money back? Residential property looks at monthly rental income, and it answers the question, how many months before I get my money back? Because that's what the investor cares about, right? If I'm giving you X amount of sales price, when am I going to get that back? And that's what the GERM can help them with. So to wrap this unit up, let's put our appraiser's hat back on one more time. So the appraiser has been hired to appraise a property. Maybe it's commercial, maybe it's residential. Anytime you're buying or selling anything, somebody's got to put value on it, and that's the job of the appraiser. So the appraiser is going to use, we've got the sales comparison approach, we have the cost approach, and we have the income capitalization approach. If they can use all three, great. If the property doesn't produce an income, they may only able to use the sales comparison approach and the cost approach. If it is rental income property, they may be only to use income and cost approach, right? So they're going to use as many of the three as they can, knowing that they can't always use all three. And once they do all this work, with the three approaches that they can, the appraiser does their final reconciliation. And their final reconciliation is analyzing and weighing the difference. Again, putting more value on the approach as it relates to that type of property. The appraiser never uses simple averaging. So if this is a single family residence, they're going to put more weight. They're going to have more emphasis on the sales comparison approach. It's their final reconciliation to get to their opinion of value so the lender can determine that loan to value ratio. Are they going to originate the loan on the sales price or the appraised amount? And the answer is whichever one is less. So now that we know what we know, let's go back in our book. Let's go back to our sample appraisal. Figure 17.1, I'm on 464. So again, the appraiser came through, they studied the subject property. If you can see it, it's 123 Colorado Lane. They got the information on the subject property. The next little block there on figure 17.1 is the contract information. What is the composition of the neighborhood? What about the site? Tell me about the land. What's the lot dimensions? What's the land? What do we need to know about the land? And then any improvements to the property. And then the next page, there's our sales comparison approach, where the appraiser made the adjustments to the comps. This one used 3 comps. Again, generally speaking, if they could use 3 or 4 comps. So they studied that subject, and then they made adjustments to the comps to match the subject. I'll come back to the bottom of 465 in just a second, but flip over to 466. There's additional comments. Appraisals are often lots of pages. Sometimes they'll throw in not only the comps, but the pictures of the comps. They'll throw in as much as they can to show the lender where they got that information, where they came to that value. So any additional comments. You can see this appraiser was able to use the cost approach, still on 466. There's the cost approach, putting value on the land. They use replacement cost of the structure. Notice there the income approach is blank. What that tells me was that this property didn't produce an income, thus they couldn't use that approach. So they're going to use as many of the 3 as they can when they can. So now let's go back to 465. And the very bottom of 465 is the appraiser's reconciliation. And what the lender cares about of this 30, 40, sometimes 80-page report, all the lender cares about is the very bottom of 465, based on a complete visual inspection of this property, da-da-da-da-da. It is my opinion that the market value of this subject of this report is $265,000. That's what the lender's looking for, so they can determine their loan to value ratio. All that for one number. And that's what the lender cares about. Questions? Go back to 477 with me on the reconciliation page. I do want to point this out. I get asked about this a lot. I think it's worth mentioning. Under the reconciliation, it talks about an automated valuation model, or an AVM. You guys see that? You guys know that better as Zestimates, for example. So some third-party websites like Zillow, for example, will produce a Zestimate. It's a computer-generated estimate of value. It's an automated estimate of value. And this is what we need to know about AVMs. AVMs look at a radius. So let's say this is our subject property. This is 123 Main Street in the center of this radius. And the AVM is going to look at everything that closed within this radius. Let's say this radius is, I don't know, half a mile. And they're going to look at everything that closed within this half-mile radius. And that's pretty much the only criteria that it looks at, that it closed. It doesn't take into consideration residential, commercial, number of bedrooms, square footage, land, all that other stuff that the appraiser's working so hard to study and determine. All it looks at is within, and it's based on density, and it looks at within this radius, what is the automated value? What is the computer generated estimate on this property? Now knowing what we know, do we think AVMs are accurate or not? Yeah, no. No. Computers haven't taken that part of our job yet. Bless you. Just kind of an FYI for you. All right, let's wrap this up real quick before break. Broker hat back on. What does the Real Estate Commission say about BPOs and CMAs? Well, remember I said these are covered under license law and commission rule. License law is 93A-6, general statute 93A. Commission rule is 58A. 0.2200. No, you do not need to know these. I just put them here for reference. And hopefully to make you think about the importance of these CMAs and doing these things competently. I'm going to say it again. Once you get your license and you get out in the real world, you need training from your BIC, from your local association on how to competently prepare these CMAs for your buyers and sellers so we can get their home sold and or have them purchase a home for prices for amounts that'll be close to what they're going to appraise for. If we know that's what the lender's basing the loan on, don't we want to advise our buyers to that? Don't we want to make sure that we're getting them good numbers and not just throwing them anything? Not much is covered under both license law and commission rule. We get a little bit more into BPOs and CMAs and post-licensing, but again, the real aha moments will come when you get out and start generating these things. To sum up a few things that license law and commission rule says, whenever we're doing a BPO or CMA, they need to be in writing. Cannot provide a verbal BPO or CMA. Do not say the word value. When that seller looks at you and says, what do you think my home is worth? You say, seller, I think your probable sales price is. What if you're property management and you're working with an investor that wants you to manage an investment property? We could use a CMA to help them find probable lease price. We are not determining value. We are not doing BPOs or CMAs for originating a mortgage loan. That is the job of the investor. Please stay in your lane. As we said at the beginning of this unit, only a non-provisional broker. Once you drop that provisional status, you can do BPO or CMA for a fee. That third party that's interested in an estimate, we're a lot cheaper than appraisers. So it might be that relocation company would rather my probable sales price as opposed to the appraiser's opinion of value. Provisional brokers cannot do these things for a fee. You can do a CMA, but you can't do it for a fee until you drop that provisional status. And none of us can charge a fee for BPO or CMA when it's just part of our job. When we're trying to get that listing, when we're talking to the seller about a price improvement, when your buyer wants to know what they should offer, we cannot charge for that. Nobody can. Some things you may want to consider if you are being hired. Make sure you're a qualified broker. What we mean by that is your license is on active and current status. We're going to talk about active and current status in our license law and commission rule. You can't get paid unless your license is active. We need to identify the scope of the work. Like, what am I doing the CMA for? Is it residential? Is it commercial? Is it for a third-party relocation company? Is it for an attorney trying to settle a divorce? And very similar to the appraiser, we're going to gather information on the subject property. When I'm doing a CMA, the first thing I do is log in MLS, pull up that property, and I look at the history. Study the history of that property. Like I said, we can go back to MLS. Triad MLS started in like mid-90s, and everything that's ever been put in there is still there. Now, I can't look at values from the mid-90s, but if there's pictures, can I kind of see the progress of the home in the last 20, 30 years, see what it's done? I'm studying it. I'm studying the history. I'm learning about the property. And I'm also familiarizing myself with the local market. Again, we're not appraisers, but we can roughly use those approaches to value. Specifically, the sales comparison approach is the closest thing we have to the CMA. And then make sure that we are only reporting probable sales price. I think that's about the fourth or fifth time I've said that. So again, I hope you hear the importance of that. Last bullet point here. I'm not repeating myself because I like to hear the sound of it come out of my mouth, right? Okay. Probable sales price or probable lease price. Anybody ready to get into the appraisal world? No, it's okay. It's okay. You don't have to. I wouldn't turn it down. I'm very interested in this. And if I wake up one day and decide I'm done with real estate, this might be the next. I don't know. We'll see what happens when I'm done with real estate one day. Don't tell Lane I said that. I don't want her to panic on me. I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. All right, I end this unit with one of my favorites, supposedly a comic strip. I guess it's funny because it's true. I don't know, but it is. It's one of my favorite comic strips in real estate that I've ever seen. And it talks about values in the eye of the beholder. Check out that tax assessor. Cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. That's all they see is dollar signs, isn't it? Values in the eye of the beholder. And again, you guys, please be considerate when you're sitting with that seller, trying to talk to them why their home won't sell for $165,000. This is their home. This means something to them. So we need to approach this with a little bit of grace, delicate. And again, the numbers don't lie. That gets us through unit 17. So those key terms are at the beginning. Key point reviews on page 480. Your student quiz, there is some math. I think all three of them. And the student quiz on page 482. Can almost guarantee you'll see sales comparison approach. After that, I'd say income capitalization approach. I'm not saying you won't see cost approach, but I think of the three, that's the one you'll least likely see, but still could be a candidate for your exam. And then there are those 50 problems in the back of the book. These are the numbers that relate to the math that we just did. Questions? We good? Got it? Okay. All right. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to blow through unit 13 and then we're going to get started in 11 to finish this out for the night. And we're back. Hanging in there with me for the last hour? Best you can. Remember, get up, move around if you need to. I get it. You guys may want to make a note. Units 13, 16, and 18. Remember, we're not worrying about one. Don't go back to one. We're done with one. 13, 16, and 18 are your least tested units. So when I say we're going to go through 13 super quick, it's because between the 13, 16, and 18, you can expect one, maybe 3 test questions. So all your study time, all your study energy, look it over, of course. 13, 16, and 18. So 13, I'm going to blow through it real quick, and then next week we'll blow through 16 and 18. I'll talk about what next week's going to look like in just a second as well. So 13, got another hat to wear. We get to wear a hat of a homeowner's insurance agent. Again, stay in your lane. We're not in homeowner's insurance agent school, but we do want a basic understanding so we can have conversations with our buyers and sellers. So the basics, and I have taken attendance, so make sure you tell me you're back. So we're going to talk about the different types of homeowners insurance. We're going to explain some homeowners issues. We're going to talk a little bit more about flood insurance, for example. So to start this unit out, let's define some words. The insurance is the agreement between the insurer and the insured. It's a bilateral contract. The insurer is the insurance company. The insured is the homeowner. The homeowner, the insured, pays the insurer. The insurer agrees to reimburse the insured if something happens to the home. Let's put that in layman's terms. The homeowner pays the insurance agent. The insurance agent promises to help them out financially when something bad happens to the home. Not all insurance agents are created equally. Another thing we want to encourage our buyers to shop around, encourage them to talk to a couple to find the rate that's best for them. Tell them to call Jake from State Farm. Tell them to call Flo from Progressive. Tell them to shop around and see which quotes they can get so they know which is best for them. If your buyer is getting a loan, homeowners insurance is required. Period. End of story. If you're working with a cash buyer, homeowners insurance is highly recommended. It's only required if a lender's involved. If you pay your loan off, the lender's no longer in the picture, homeowners insurance is highly recommended. The premium is the consumer's cost of coverage. The premium is the insured's cost of coverage. Property insurance is also referred to as casualty insurance. This protects the insured from damage caused by the property, or to the property, I should say. Property insurance covers the insured for damage caused to the property. Liability insurance protects the insured from losses or damages caused by a third party or to the third party when you're on my property. Package insurance then combines the two. Most of us have a packaged insurance where the property and the people are covered in the event something bad happens. There are several different types of homeowners insurance policy, or just insurance policies, I should say. You're welcome to look 373, 374. You're welcome to look at those just to kind of get an idea. We're going to talk about just a few of them. Uh-oh. Take care. The HO3 is the most common policy. This is the one, the lender just won't let you get any policy. They want a certain level of coverage. So the lender has to approve the policy. Once you decide who you want to use, Jake from State Farm, then the lender has to approve it. And they're looking for, most of these HO3 policies will have the lender's minimum coverage. They also provide the insured with the greatest amount of protection. Again, this is just the most common, and it's the one that the lender's looking for. Remember, you guys, buyer's agents. We get that buyer under contract. First thing we need to do is get the contract to the lender so the lender can start their process. Tell your buyer the lender's your priority. Once your buyer gets the lender what they need to go through the first round of underwriting, now we want to get our buyer shopping around for insurance. I want them securing insurance while we are still in due diligence. Because what if we find out that the insurance policy is more than their allowable PITI, more than their allowable payment amount? That means we're not getting loan approval. Worst case scenario is a buyer's agent. If we have to terminate, let's do so during due diligence so I can get my buyer their earnest money back. So let's get them shopping around, have the lender approve it, have them decide which policy they want, the lender approve it while we're still in due diligence, just in case. More on that in just a second. Another common policy you guys have probably heard of, not in these verbiages, but another common policy is HO4. This is your tenant's policy. This is renter's insurance. So our rental properties are going to have two types of insurance. The landlord is going to have the home insured through homeowners. The tenant is going to have their stuff insured, should have their stuff insured. And that would be the HO4 policy. Another one just to point out is the HO6. This is the policy for condominium owners. Remember, condo owners only own from sheetrock to sheetrock, paint to paint. So it's not going to cover the whole building. It's just going to cover the inside and their stuff. So it's a walls in ownership. Defining some more words. The condition is a limitation on coverage. An example of a limitation might be vacant properties, which we're going to talk about soon. An endorsement may be added to an insurance policy. This is coverage for something that's not normally covered. So think about rare and valuable items. Maybe you have grandma's antique jewelry, for example. You may want to consider getting an endorsement. It's something rare and valuable. An exclusion is loss due to a specific event. So for example, most homeowners insurance policy won't cover us due to acts of war or terrorism. That's an exclusion. You can see back to 373 or the first page there. There's coverage and claims, things that are typically covered in a typical insurance policy. If you want additional coverage, just call your insurance agent. Questions so far? Anytime anybody is applying for new insurance, one thing the insurance agent will always pull is something called a CLUE report. The CLUE report is our comprehensive loss underwriting exchange. It is the insurance agent's database. It has a history of all claims made in the last 7 years. If the people or the property have a lot of claims in the last 7 years, premiums may be higher. If they have a history of filing claims, premiums may be higher. Again, I need to make sure that my buyer can afford homeowners insurance while we're still in due diligence. And I know your buyer knows their claim history, but we don't know the claim history of the property. So if it has a history, I'm not saying you can't get insurance. I'm saying you may have to pay more for it than others. So this is what the insurance agent pulls, that CLUE report. All claims live there for 7 years. Let's talk about vacant versus unoccupied property. This is a very practical in practice. I think this is why we have this unit, is because we need to be prepared to have a conversation with our sellers if the property is vacant or unoccupied. At some point between now and closing, the seller has to move out. Yes? If they're moving out a couple days before settlement, not a big deal. If they're moving out a couple weeks or a couple months before settlement, we need to encourage them to contact their insurance company and tell them that the home is vacant. Vacant properties are more riskier than occupied homes. Vacant properties have a higher amount of theft, vandalism, because nobody's living there. You guys hear on the news every once in a while somebody breaks in and steals the copper wiring. A lot of times that's in a vacant property because there's nobody there to monitor it. When they call and report their home as vacant for, a month before closing or whatever, they'll probably pay a higher premium. But here's the deal. If they don't let the insurance agent know that it's vacant and something happens, they probably won't be covered. All I can do is advise. Can I make anybody do anything? I've yet to figure out how to do it. I'm trying, but I've yet to figure out all to do it. All I can do is encourage my seller to call their insurance agent. You say, yeah, but I have to pay more money. Yeah, you are. But understand, if you don't let them know that this home is vacant and somebody breaks in and steals your copper wire, they're not going to cover you. You guys think you should document that conversation? I wish I saw more head shaking. Yes. Let's try that again. Do you think you should document that conversation? Please do. You tell the seller to call and they don't, and then something happens and they say, my agent didn't tell me to, and you don't have a documentation. So you have a conversation face to face or in person or on the phone. You go home and you type out an email talking about, per our conversation, I recommend you talk to your insurance agent and let them know that it's vacant. This has come up. This has been a thing. And this is why I think this unit is here. So we know to tell our sellers to report it as vacant. Am I allowed to record conversations? What I know about audio recording is if you have the other party's consent. So if you go to the seller's house and you say, can I record this? And they say yes, I'd get that documented too, right? I would rather have an email, a text, something with a date and time stamp on it. Unoccupied homes aren't as risky, but they do have risk. Their premiums may or may not go up again. It's just my job to encourage them to talk to their insurance agent. Comments on that? Another conversation to have with our sellers specifically is making sure that they understand that it's still their home until that deed changes hands. They've got to maintain insurance through closing. There is a risk of loss provision in our offer to purchase and contract that we looked at that tells us the risk is on the seller. It's still their home. The risk of loss provision in the offer to purchase and contract also covers, for example, the question, what happens if the house burns down when we're under contract? I mean, that's horrible to think about, but anything can happen, right? So what happens if we go under contract and the house burns down? Well, it's not over yet. The buyer has a choice. They can choose to terminate. If they terminate, they'll get their earnest money and their due diligence back per the offer to purchase and contract. If they don't terminate, they go on to closing, they get the property and the seller's proceeds from the insurance company to rebuild. Buyer's agents, when you're under contract, if the house burns down, your buyer's going to call you and say, oh no, what do I do? My recommendation is to have them talk to their attorney because they got a decision to make. Do I terminate or do I proceed? Listing agents, make sure your sellers know they got to keep insurance through closing. I've had a couple at least 2 sellers now. Pretty much as soon as we go under contract, they're like, sweet, I'm canceling my homeowner's insurance. Golly, no. So just make sure you let them know they're going to need to keep insurance through closing. Oh no. That's why this is here. Yep. And let's talk about the day of closing with insurance. So the seller's policy is ending and the buyer's policy is beginning. I think a common misconception is the home is doubly insured on the day of settlement. The date and time that the deed is recorded is going to be the official end of the seller's, beginning of the buyer's. Does that make sense? So what a crazy scenario. What if the house burns down on the day of closing? The insurance companies are going to want to see, they want to know from the fire marshal, what time did the house burn down? And they'll want to know from the attorney, what time was the deed recorded? Because whatever time it burned down, that's whose party, that's who's going to be responsible for it. I don't know, but I got you now. So that's the important thing. Questions on this? Again, I think that's why we have this whole unit, is to make sure that we're having these conversations with our buyers and sellers. I'll share this with you guys. The Real Estate Commission's education department is like 42, 45 years old, somewhere in there. And when they first started 40 some years ago, they had insurance, and then somewhere along the lines, they dropped it. When I took pre-licensing, we didn't have this. Not even 5 years ago, they picked it back up. And it's of my opinion, it's because of this right here. So this is still fairly new again, but just making sure we're having those appropriate conversations with our buyers and sellers. So what's this mean for us? We need to make sure that our property owners talk to the insurance agency if they plan to leave it vacant or unoccupied. All we can do is encourage them to do so. And then we got to tell our sellers, our property owners, need to maintain coverage through the day of closing. If closing gets delayed 2 days or 2 weeks, they need to get on the phone with their insurance agent and extend their policy for that 2 days, 2 weeks. When we looked at our offer to purchase and contract, we talked about possession. And the contract says possession being by the buyer, meaning when does the buyer, i.e. the new owner, get the keys? When do they get the garage door openers and the gate codes and all the access to the property that they need? And the contract specifically says that possession doesn't happen until closing, until that deed is recorded, the very last act of closing. Our offer to purchase and contract also gives us some options for additional possessions if the parties agree. Totally negotiable. The parties may agree to do a buyer possession before closing, meaning they are moving in before the deed's recorded. The parties may agree to do a seller possession after closing, meaning the seller's not moving out on closing day. They're moving out a couple days later. We have forms for both of these. We briefly mentioned our addendum for both scenarios when we were in Unit 10, talking about what they do. And the big thing to understand about these scenarios, the big thing to understand about these forms, in both of these situations, one party is acting as the landlord, the other party is acting as the tenant. And it's our job to make sure that our party is adequately insured. And that's the big part of these addendum. So before they agree to this, before they sign off on it, both parties are encouraged to talk to their insurance agents. And the two buyers and sellers will agree on rent and who's going to maintain the lawn and are pets allowed. And I mean, it's really only, I think it's a page and a half now, maybe a little bit more than a page. And it covers just the basics. Both of these forms are set aside for short-term possession. So maybe your buyer's starting a new job next week, but we're not closing until Monday, and they really want to get in, you know, this weekend to get unpacked. So maybe the two can work something out. Maybe the seller has had a delay in the closing that they're buying, and they need a couple extra days, and the two can work something out. An offer is made, it's considered. The offeree has three choices. They can agree to do the possession at a different time. They can reject doing the possession at a different time, or I guess they could counter the rent offered. But again, the big thing with these is making sure that both parties have a very clear conversation with their insurance companies to make sure that they're adequately insured. Questions on this? Another piece to mention in the insurance world is flood insurance. Flood insurance is regulated by FEMA. Now, we just said for homeowners insurance, we want our buyers shopping around, right? If you want new insurance tomorrow, it's encouraged as you shop around. Flood insurance is what it is. It's provided by the insurance companies, but there's no point shopping around for it because FEMA says this is how much you're going to charge. So while we can, you know, we do get different rates on homeowners insurance. Flood insurance is just standard. You're not going to be able to compare and contrast. Homeowners insurance agents offer it, but they don't determine how much to charge you. That all comes from the top. That all comes from FEMA. And FEMA just doesn't run around regulating insurance and charging you money. They also try to work with the homeowners, with the area, on how we can reduce the impact of flooding. Is there anything? Can we build a berm or something? A retention pond? You know, what can we do? If it's got a problem with flooding, every single time it rains, FEMA may get involved to see what we can do to protect that area. Whether or not it's in a flood hazard zone is determined all by FEMA. They kind of use, look with me if you will, on the top of page 378. They kind of use an algorithm to determine how much to charge you for flood insurance. So they want to know the year that the building was constructed, the building occupancy, number of floors, location, what's the flood risk, etc. So they put all that information, the insurance agent gathers the information, they put it in their processor, and beep, boop, boop, they say flood insurance for this home is X amount per month. Telling you guys right now, flood insurance is not cheap. Again, remember that buyer that's about maxed out on their pre-approval amount? We need to be very, very careful, the properties in flood insurance, that it doesn't tip them over, because we're not going to get loan approval. Many, many websites, including FEMA, have maps that you can look at. So you go in, you put the address in, and it'll tell you if it's in a flood zone or not. This is Winston-Salem. My Winston-Salem people get grounded here. This is Stratford. This is Knollwood. Chick-fil-A is right there. This is Thruway Shopping Center, Salem Parkway. So let's say you're helping, and back on the other side of Salem Parkway are residential, Greenwich and all up here are residential areas. Let's say you're helping a buyer and they're interested in buying a property here. They are awfully close to a flood hazard, right? I'm not a flood insurance agent. I'm not an expert, but can I look at a map and say, gee, you guys might be dealing with flood insurance? And again, if they're at the tippy top, don't we want to have this conversation before they go under contract and suffer losing their due diligence because flood insurance will tip them over their pre-approved amount? If you can, the recommendation is you look at the flood map before you write up anything. Listing agents, when your seller tells you that it's in a floodplain, a flood zone, that's a material fact. Buyer's agents, we're just helping our buyers verify. We're helping them get that information. Oh, I bet. This is Stratford right here. This is Knollwood. Like I said, Thruway Shopping Centers right here. This really makes me sad, because pre-pandemic, when we were all still in person, I could say we are here. That's where we used to meet. But now we're all not all here. Is this something I want to address with them before they see the property? That way they don't fall in love with it and be out of reach for them. I understand that question, but I also understand if these buyers are looking at 30 properties and you're looking at flood zones for all 30, you know what I'm saying? So you can go either way if you want to look at it before they go out, or if you want to wait till they say, I like this property, what do I need to know about it? You know, however you want to approach that. But guys, y'all turn off HGTV. Buyers don't look at 3 houses and then make a decision. That's not real, y'all. Sometimes they're there for weeks, months. Sometimes we're looking at lots of properties before they find the one. There is no magic number. So that's kind of a decision for you to make. What I'm telling you is, let's help our buyer determine this at some point so they know what they may or may not be getting into. Oh, the flood area. That's right. Love it or list it. Y'all turn off HGTV. Are y'all still watching that? Turn it off. At least you get your license. That stuff's not real. I don't know the neighborhood back here, but like I said, this is 421. This is Knollwood. So then you come up here and you come down a back road and come up through over here. Whole residential, this side of Salem Parkway. So with flood insurance, what do we need to know? We can look for red flags. So do we look at the map every time? Well, maybe, but can't we also look for red flags? What are some red flags we're looking for? Are there bodies of water on the property? Is there a creek? Is there a river? Is there a stream? Is there a lake? Is there a pond? Is there water on the property? If so, maybe it's in a flood insurance. Just because there's water on the property doesn't mean it impacts the structure. I had a listing once, it was 5 acres. The house was on the street. So the other 4.75 acres were behind it, and it was all wooded, unusable. They had a little campsite back there. It was a lot of fun. But in the very back of the 5-acre property was a creek. The back of the property was in a flood zone, but the structure itself wasn't, because it was 4.7 acres away from it. So just because you see it doesn't mean it affects it, but it should raise up our little red flag. Remember, we're not insurance agents, experts. We're helping them find facts. We're helping them find information. So if you see water, you say, hey, look, water. Let's go look at the FEMA map and see if it might impact you. Let's talk to the insurance agent.
Hey Julie, I have a question. I'm trying
Yeah.
to follow you. So if the water comes to your backyard, you don't have to have flood insurance, is what you're saying?
I'm
And
saying,
it's
I
not
don't know,
messing
I'm
with the
saying the property, it depends on where the structure is located to the water. What we gotta ensure is the structure, not the land, but the structure. So if it's got a high elevation, it sits way up, and the river's way down there, the creek's way down there, you may not have to have flood insurance. You may be in a flood zone, but not have to have flood insurance. And that's back to that little algorithm on 378. What is the risk? Where is the location of the property to that body of water? And guys, those are questions we can't answer because we're not the insurance agents. I'm just looking for those little red flags. Listing agents, discuss it with your seller. By the way, this is covered in our listing agreement. So that's our opportunity to have this conversation with the seller. Hey, do y'all pay flood insurance? And it is a material fact. So if it is in a floodplain, we do have to disclose. And as we said, buyer's agents, let's get insurance secured while we're still in due diligence, because then we'll know for sure if we're dealing with flood insurance, etc. Questions? Do I have any insurance agents on the call? It's not uncommon. Don't look like this class, or at least that you're fessing up to. That's 13. So you got those key terms on page 371. Key point review. I would make a note to look at the key point review a couple days before the exam. Like we said, 13, 16, and 18, 1, 2, 3 questions. If you want to see some practice test questions, that student quiz is on page 381. Questions? I need to stop sharing just for 1 second. Hang tight. Where we're heading, if you want to start finding it, where we're heading is we're going to get started on unit 11. Unit 11 and 12, we're switching gears. This class, your post-licensing class, is heavy on residential sales. But it's also important that we understand a big part of real estate is also the landlord-tenant side of it as well. So we're going to put down sales for a minute, and we're going to talk about the rental side. Unit 11 is specifically the relationship between the landlord and the tenant. I don't care if the landlord has a real estate license or not. We're talking about the relationship between the landlord and the tenant. In unit 12, we bring in the property manager. In unit 12, the landlord has decided to hire an agent to manage their property. So unit 11, that landlord-tenant relationship. We are going to talk about leasehold estates. We're going to talk about some basic characteristics of a lease, things that we typically see in leases. We got several different types of leases and their purposes. And then I got a state-specific section, the North Carolina Residential Rental Agreement Act. So this covers in North Carolina, this covers the relationship between landlord and tenant. So let's start. with defining some words. The lease is the agreement between the lessor and the lessee. It's a bilateral agreement, which means both parties have duties and obligations to each other. The lessor or the giver of the lease is the landlord. The lessee or the receivee of the lease is the tenant. You guys remember back in Unit 2, we talked about freehold estates. Freehold estates were the estates of ownership. So we talked about fun things like fee simple absolute, fee simple defeasible, life estates. That seemed like so long ago, didn't it? The other thing we mentioned when we talked about estates, we already covered the freehold. So now here we are talking about leasehold. Leasehold estates are estates of possession. And there's several different types of leasehold estates, which we'll talk about. Remember, when we see estate, when we talk about a freehold estate or a leasehold estate, what we're saying is, what interest does the individual have in the property? So if you have a freehold estate, you have an interest of ownership. If you have a leasehold estate, you have an interest of possession. What makes leases so interesting? It's a combination of the two. Somebody has a freehold estate, i.e. the landlord, and the other person, the tenant, has the leasehold. So we're combining our estates. We're combining our two different estates, just depending on if you're the landlord or the tenant, which one you have. I got to go off book for just a second to get some terms. And what these terms are saying is basically what we just said. They're a combination of the two types of estates, the two types of interests. So the privity of estate, this is the legal relationship between the two, the landlord and the tenant. Privity of contract says that they're only binding to the parties to the contract. So the landlord and the tenant. And again, just kind of addresses, good timing, huh? It just kind of addresses the two different estates on the same property. Two different interests in the same property. So we're going to talk about some different leasehold estates. I like the figure on the top of page 323, figure 11.2. It does a nice job of kind of summarizing the different estates. So the first type of estate, of leasehold estate that we have, is something called an estate for years, also known as a tenancy for years. Let me say this, when we talk about these different types of estates, what differentiates them, what makes them different, is how they end. So with an estate for years, we have a specific beginning date. We have a specific ending date. We agreed going into this that we're going to have this estate for years from this date to that date. And when it's over, it's over. We don't have to give each other notice because we've already decided when it's going to end. This is important. Do not let the name fool you. An estate for years, maybe it's for a year, maybe it's for 5, maybe it's for a month, maybe it's for a day. An estate for years is an estate for years because it has a specific beginning date and a specific ending date. And when it's over, it's over. We don't have to give each other notice. Could we agree to extend it? Sure. But we don't have to. We've already agreed that it'll end on this date. So the estate for years has a specific ending date. A periodic tenancy, also known as a tenancy from period to period, has a specific start date, but we don't have a specific end date. We are going to automatically renew it until one of us ends it, until the landlord or the tenant ends it. It's not uncommon for an estate for years to turn into a periodic tenancy. So you're going to rent my house. We do a lease for a year. At the end of the year, we decide we got a good thing going on. You're paying me. I'm putting a roof over your head. Everybody's happy. We may, at the end of the year, go into a periodic tenancy where we automatically renew it each month until one of us decides to end it. Question comes in, is this a timeshare? No. What do we know about timeshares? 5, 5, 5, 10. The first two fives, at least 5 separate time periods over at least 5 years. Timeshare is an ownership. This is a lease. Look with me on page 323. There are North Carolina rules on how much time, how much notice we have to give each other to end a periodic tenancy. If our lease is week to week, landlord or tenant need to give a 2 days notice. If it's a month to month, we need a 7 days notice. If it's a year to year, we need a 1 month's notice. So we're going to automatically renew it until one party, landlord or tenant, terminates it. Another estate, leasehold estate, is an estate at will, also known as a tenancy at will. I don't have a lease. In this case, the tenant is there because they have permission by the landlord. The difference in an estate at will and a periodic tenancy is that with an estate at will, no prior notice is required. Either one of us could end it at any time. I don't have to give you 30 days or whatever. So we keep going until one of us says it's over. And just like that, it's over. You have permission to be there until you're told otherwise. And then the last leasehold estate we have is an estate at sufferance, also known as tenancy at sufferance. With these, somebody is suffering. Who's suffering? The landlord, because they got a squatter. I want you guys to write something down for me. Everybody ready? If you stay, you pay. If you pay, you stay. If the tenant is paying and the landlord's accepting, we have a periodic tenancy or a tenancy at will. If the tenant is there and not paying, we have an estate at sufferance. Oftentimes, like we said, a holdover. It started with a valid lease. The lease ended, but the tenant won't leave. There's only one legal method that the landlord can use to get a squatter off their property. We'll talk about that next week. That's under our North Carolina residential rental guidelines. So if the tenant doesn't want to leave, if we got a squatter in our hand, the landlord has to go through the legal process to get them off. And I've heard from some of you in the past, some of you are landlords, and I've heard that getting somebody off your property is not as easy as one would think, because it is a legal process. So again, if you pay, you stay. We have an agreement. I pay, you accept. We have an agreement. If you pay, you stay. If you stay, you pay. Failure to pay means you're a squatter. Questions so far? So what's next week going to look like? I'm going to stop here because you guys know by now, I don't like starting something new just to only get a few minutes into it. So let's talk about next week before you go anywhere. We're gonna finish Unit 11. Again, good state-specific stuff, talking about the North Carolina Residential Rental Agreement Act. We're gonna talk about briefly about the North Carolina Vacation Rental Act. After 11, we go into Unit 12. 12 is the relationship with the property manager and the landlord. So remember, 11 is just the relationship between the landlord and tenant, and 12, we bring in the property manager. In Unit 12, we have some investor math that's scattered all through your book. I'll help you find that. The end of Unit 12 is our last piece of math. I only have one more little piece of math left. Look at the mini celebrations, okay? After 12, we'll do Unit 19. Unit 19 is our fair housing unit. Unit 19 is so important, not just for your pre-licensing and post-licensing classes, your state exam, but it's also important for your career. I don't know much that can get you in trouble faster than a violation of fair housing. So please, please, please look over Unit 19. So 11, 12, 19. We'll blow through 18 and 16 real quick. Don't worry about that. And then after that, we get going in license, law, and commission rule, which is your state, the majority of your state specific section. You guys, let me share my screen one more time. I asked you guys, was a couple months ago now, to be looking in the online learning system. There's a tab called License, Law, and Commission Rule. And specifically to get us ready for this state-specific section, we asked you to read the comments. So if you haven't done it yet, please do so to get yourselves ready for end of next week, first of the following week. There we go. The comments under the license, law, and commission rule. And this is where the majority of your state specific section is. If it's been a while since you read it, you may want to look it over again. And then that's it. We are so close to the end. We only have 2 more weeks, guys. Breathe with me. Breathe. It's all good. So 11, 12, 19. And then license, law, and commission rule. Like I said, we're going to blow through 16 and 18. I'm not even worried about those. What questions do I have? Comments, concerns, thoughts on life? What I got? Y'all have a great weekend. Go get some of that sunshine and warm weather. Everybody be safe. And we'll see you guys next Tuesday.